be not deceived. But it's actually a scriptural phrase, and it occurs 5 times in the Bible. So we want to just go through and have a look at what the biblical ideas behind deception are all about, and to take the warning to ourselves. So, what is the word deception? Well, you look up a dictionary and you'll find that the definition is something along these lines: to deliberately cause someone or something to believe something that is not true, especially for personal gain. So it's when you try to disguise the truth. Now, it has 2 parts, because there's a deceiver and there's the deceived. For the deceiver, it's a matter of withholding the truth, of disguising the truth. But for the deceived, it's a matter of trust. It's, do I trust that that person is telling me the truth, that they are who they say they are? So this idea of deception combines truth and trust. Okay, so we're going to look at those 2 elements throughout tonight. And of course, that's a big thing in the society in which we live today, isn't it? I guess, really, when you boil it all down, we'll have a look at some examples in a moment, but deception goes hand in hand with lies, or a lack of telling the whole truth or all of the truth. So that's what deception's couched in. It's couched in language that doesn't uphold truth. And that deception will succeed if you're not given all the facts. So it might be, I don't know, a politician or a school teacher or a parent or whoever doesn't give you all the facts, and you are then left to make the assumptions that that person's telling the truth, but you're not given all the facts, so you're duped. You can get sucked in by the tone and the style rather than on the facts. So it sounds good, it looks good, it feels good, so the heart rules the head. And that happens on many occasions as well, and especially in big environments. And that's the whole purpose when some form of product launch or marketing spree takes place. You get swept up with the emotion rather than the facts behind the product. You choose not to investigate. So you say, I don't really want to do any more investigation. I accept what's said. That's as far as I need to go. Well, there's actually a proverb about that. Those sort of people are called the simple. We'll be coming back to the simple later on towards the end. The simple believe every word. I don't need to investigate anymore. What I've heard is enough to convince me. We don't want to be the simple. We want to find out the facts. And finally, you'll be deceived if you don't prepare for it. So it may be something that's unexpected. And there's a quote there which we won't turn up. But those that don't prepare for the return of Jesus Christ in Luke 21, verse 34, may find that that day comes upon them unawares. And so they're caught out like a bird in a trap. They're ensnared, as verse 35 of that chapter goes on to. Okay, so that's sort of, broadly speaking, the ideas behind deception and why people give in to deception without actually knowing. Okay, so it's a matter of trust. So let's just think about poor Gladys a week or 2 ago when that bombshell hit that she'd been seeing the minister or the member for Parliament who's been held up at the ICAC Commission for corruption. And she had no idea. How was she duped for 5 years? Well, don't think she's going to marry him now, but she said she used to love him and she even planned to marry him, but now he's up before the Independent Commission Against Corruption for taking cash for bribes and other deceptive operations. Even her, she was deceived. So that's just in the news, and of course, I guess you could go over to America, and if you've been following the American election over there, Iran and Russia are now, by the CIA in America, said to be putting out deceptive emails to try and persuade electors in America. And they can see it, they know it's happening. But I also saw another report about the Trump campaign and the type of emails that they're sending. And some people are getting up to 50 emails a week. And the policy was, you say something long enough and hard enough and loud enough, you'll convince people to believe it. And it's just bombarding. Up to 50. So, here's just a whole list of words associated with the idea of deception, okay? And it's quite broad. And I am convinced that you will come across this at any stage of your life, wherever you are, on whatever continent. Any of those touch you? I'm sure some of them. Okay? You probably had scam emails come asking for money, and it's a hoax, it's from the Commonwealth, but it's actually not, it's a hacker behind it. Or even, people who do it deliberately for a living. People like magicians use deception to be able to convince you to come back to their shows because it was so good, but they know it's a deception, so you're not fooling them entirely, but they're using sleight of hand and misdirection. That's the whole setup of a con person who's trying to do it without you actually knowing. So I thought, just for maybe some of the younger ones, we could just put up a few pictures just to start and show that this whole idea, there can be some areas where you're persuaded to see something that may be there, it may not be there, just in pictures, but that whole concept can move right down to disguise and camouflage, etc., etc. So, let's put the first one up. So if I was to ask maybe a young person, and then I'll ask maybe an older person what they can see in that picture. Who would like, amongst this row of young girls, to say what they think they can see in that picture? Can you see a person? What sort of person? Say it louder. A lady. An old lady or a young lady? Old. Okay. An old lady. What can you see? Now, go on, Kit. No, it is a person, but it's deceiving because there's actually two, an old one and a young one. Can anyone see the old one? All right. Can you see the young one? Okay. All right. Just to help out. But people use that method to actually fool you in real life on other levels. And just for the boys, here's a male one, old man, and a young man. All right. And you could stare at that for a long time and probably not see either. A cat. Anything else? It's done in this way. This is for the older ones. What can you see there? No. What about if you do this? See that? Same drawing, 90 degrees turn, and it's a horse. All right. Now, that's just drawings, but do you know, we have nature's method of doing exactly the same thing, using this method of pretending to be something that they're not. This is what we call nature's cheats. Nature's cheating insects. And here they are. A predator looking at that would think that that's just part of the bark, wouldn't they? They wouldn't know that that's an animal of prey that they could eat. And the insects got this wonderful camouflage and disguise. And of course, that was two of the words that we saw in the list of all the deceptions, camouflage and disguise. Spies use disguise, and the army uses camouflage to try and deceive the enemy. All right? So the purpose of tonight is to see whether in the truth supposedly put forward, there actually is lies in the detail. All right, so can you see the magnifying glass is actually magnifying what the word truth is made up of, and it's all these word lies. All right, now that's the job that's been given to us to do with the Bible tonight, to have a look and see. All right, so 5 times. So I've put them here. There's actually 5 occurrences of the phrase, be not deceived. Okay. And 5 occurrences of the phrase, let no man deceive you. Essentially, it's the same. In fact, you can see Matthew 24, verse 4, and Mark 13, verse 5 says, let no man deceive you, from the Olivet prophecy. And if we go back, you can see that Luke 21 says, be not deceived, from the Olivet prophecy. So these 2 phrases actually mean the same. Okay, sometimes it's be not deceived, sometimes it's let no man deceive you. It's saying the same thing. 10 times in Scripture. I'm saying 10, but really there's 11, but I've put the 2 from the Olivet prophecy. They're identical in the same line up the top. So we want to just pick a few of those up and analyze what it was that Jesus or the apostles really wanted us to be wary of in case we were deceived and we didn't actually see the truth for what it was in a particular scenario. But I guess we really got to really step back and just say, hang on a minute, when was the first deception ever recorded in history? Now, I know the older ones will know this, but do any of the younger ones know? When was the first time somebody was deceived in the Bible, which is really in history? Because the Bible talks about when history started. Who knows when the first deception took place? Yes? Very good. Well done. It was. Now, amongst the older ones, where would you go in the Bible to find proof of that? Because the word deceive doesn't occur in Genesis 3. That's right. Okay? So you may like to turn up 1 Timothy chapter 2. Okay? Paul's assessment of this, the first deception that took place some 6,000 years ago, when the serpent fabricated a plausible suggestion that sort of had a mixture of truth and falsehood. And Eve, not seeking to find out the facts of the case that was being presented by the serpent, either from Adam or from the angels who came every night to discuss these things, as we know, jumped to the wrong conclusion, and she was deceived. In other words, she believed the lie. Now, how do we know that? Well, 1 Timothy 2 says this, verse 14, and Adam was not deceived. Quite clear, there's that word that we're looking at. But the woman, Eve, who's mentioned in verse 13, being deceived, was in the transgression. So she didn't go to find out those facts. What did we say? A deception will occur when you won't go searching for all the facts. Sounded plausible. I'm just going to go with it. I'm just going to go with it with my heart. It looks good, didn't it? It looked good. Feels good. She pulled it off. Okay, tastes good. All right, so all the things that we said, how a deception happens, are clearly seen in the very first case in Genesis 3 that Paul comments on here. Now, this scenario that happened 6,000 years ago has been repeated billions and billions of times. How many was it that Luke mentioned this morning live on the planet? 7.8 billion, all right? So that's just now. So this scenario has been repeated billions of times on individual scales and on collective scales. And when I say collective scale, I mean, target market groups where a marketer might try and deceive a group of people to buy their product, and they put things on their labels that aren't true. Okay, so, the big case of Nurofen, who put different painkillers up for different parts of the body that experience pain. It was the same thing in all the packets. But you thought you were buying the one that helped your foot, and this one here helped your, I don't know, your heart. It's the same thing. So they got taken up before the ASIC Commission and paid a fine. Okay? But that's one group. Whole countries, through propaganda, can be deceived. So when we say collective, we're talking national sometimes. Now, that's the world in which we live. It's happening around you all the time, from home, unfortunately, in the house, even amongst, family members and brothers and sisters and all the squabble and sort of white lies that go on, to school and university and work and politics and the government and the geopolitical scene across the planet. So it's quite a big subject. Now, we live in what's called a postmodern world. A postmodern world that really says that truth is whatever you feel or think it is. There's no longer anything such as absolute truth that doesn't move. If you think it's right, and I think it's right, but we're in opposite positions, that's okay. I don't mind. You can be right and I can be right, but we can actually be on opposite sides. But that's okay, because truth is whatever you think or feel it should be. So how do you defend truth and integrity in a postmodern world? I think really that's the title of tonight. Okay, so be not deceived is the biblical phrase, but if we wanted to put it into a phrase that we can understand, it's really how do we go and defend the truth that the Bible teaches in a postmodern world that promotes truth as being what you think it is. Well, let's have a look at some of these quotes. Let's just go through them on the slides here. You can turn these up as you go along. Sometimes they might be a bit hard to have your hand in 3 spots, but you can see on the screen there that Jesus unmistakably said, "Do not be deceived," in the Olivet prophecy. And the context in which he said that, maybe we'll turn up one of them. Let's turn up the first one, Matthew 24, verse 4, to see what it was that he warned against. Verse 4, and Jesus answered their question that they asked him, and he starts this Olivet prophecy. Jesus answered and said unto them, "Take heed that no man deceive you." Now that really is the opening sentence for everything that he's going to say in Matthew 24. So all the rest of the chapter is about how to stop being deceived. But the first thing that he says in verse 5, he says, "For many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and they will deceive many." Okay. So here in the Olivet prophecy, Jesus is prophesying of a time when there's going to be trouble and chaos. And you can see that in verse 6 and 7, all the pain that will happen. In those times of trouble, in those times of chaos and confusion, don't get caught out in the heat of the moment. Don't be deceived by someone saying, "I'm Christ." Now, of course, we probably wouldn't have that today. We've had a few. I think, Jonestown in the 70s was an individual who took people away saying he's the Messiah. But on the whole, it doesn't happen quite like that. I think, really, for us today, a false Christ is anyone that promotes a false gospel. Because Christ preached the gospel. So you can tell who's the true Christ by the gospel message that they're preaching. Now that changes it a bit. There are many false Christs that preach false gospels. Now we won't turn this one up. You may like to put down next to your verse in Matthew 24, Galatians 1 verse 6 to 8, which categorically says there's only one gospel. That's it. There's not 2 or 3. So if the gospel of the Bible that you understand doesn't match up with the gospel that someone else is preaching, They have to be false. It's pretty blunt. It's pretty clear. In fact, Paul in Galatians 1 says, and he does it a little bit tongue-in-cheek, he says, if I or an angel preached any other gospel than the one true gospel that you already have, he must be accursed. That's strong language. That's very strong language. So don't get caught out on the hop. When you're in a bit of turmoil and confusion, and someone says, look, I think this is what the truth is, but it's not the same as what you understand it from the Bible, don't listen. Don't be deceived. Don't be caught out on the hop. Now, clearly, Jesus here is talking about teachings, isn't he? Doctrines. This has reference to right and wrong teachings or doctrines. Well, come to another one. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. This one's about doctrine as well. This one's about teachings also. Paul in Thessalonians is saying exactly the same thing as Jesus in the Olivet prophecy. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 3, let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come except there come a falling away first. And many of us may be aware that the phrase a falling away is the Greek word that we use today in English as to apostasize. In other words, to corrupt truth. Now, the Thessalonians, they had a belief that Jesus was coming almost immediately. And people were saying that. Don't worry about going to work, give up your day job. Jesus is coming. So they were giving up their day job. They were sort of living in homes and started to, get a little bit hungry because money wasn't coming in. So they would go to their neighbours for food, etc. And it was starting to become a problem because they were listening to this false prophecy. Paul says that if some say that Christ is coming right now, like in his time, don't listen to them, because the scriptures demonstrate that there must be a corruption of doctrines introduced to the new believers of God's truth before Jesus Christ returns a second time. Now, Paul may not have known how long that period was, but he says, don't be deceived. Don't think that you have it right when you give up your day job and start becoming busybodies. You can see that in chapter 3, verse 11. Some begin to walk among you disorderly, working not at all, but are busybodies. Well, that's what happens when you're idle and you're doing nothing, and you're just sitting around at home loafing on the couch. So don't be surprised when God's truth is apostatized. And don't be surprised that it might happen on a large scale so that the majority are in the apostasy part and it's only the minority that still believe God's truth. So this is the difficulty that Paul is highlighting about deception. So clearly this has relation to right and wrong teachings as well, doesn't it? Well, let's have a look at another one. This time, let's come to Ephesians 5. Here it changes. It's not about doctrines on this occasion. This is Paul talking about bad behaviour. So Ephesians 5, verse 3 to 7, or verse 2 for context. And walk in love as Christ also hath loved us. So it's about how you live your life, how you walk before God. Walk in love as Christ also hath loved you, and given himself for us an offering and a sacrifice to God for a sweet-smelling savour. Now the Ephesians had in the background a sect or a group of people who promoted the idea that how you lived had nothing to do with what you thought and what went on in your head. There was no correlation between the two. You could live honourably before God mentally and live however you liked physically. Paul says, no, you cannot do that. So he goes through a list. He says, verse 3, but fornication and all uncleanness or covetousness, let it not once be named among you as becometh saints. neither filthiness. Now, I've just put definitions for this verse because these are some of the words that may not have a sort of easy modern day equivalent. Neither filthiness. Filthiness is really obscene language, obscene words, okay? Foolish talking, that's more the flippant person with their flippancy and their buffoonery and their clowning around, stupidity, okay? The goons that, go around our streets in their motor cars saying all these words. Some of them are obscene as well, but they're doing all this foolish talking, Nor jesting. Now, this is just crude humour, crude jokes, which are said in the workplace and around the place, and you try and shut your ears to all of that, which are not convenient, but rather giving of thanks. For this ye know, that no whoremonger, nor unclean person, nor covetous man who is an idolater hath any inheritance in the kingdom of God, in the kingdom of Christ and of God. Let no man deceive you with vain words. If someone comes and tells you, it's okay, do it, it's fine. As long as you keep your mind pure, your body can do whatever. Don't be deceived. All right? Don't let anyone persuade you otherwise. This type of behaviour does not go hand in hand with a life of godliness. You need godly behaviour to match godly thoughts. That's what he's saying. So don't be deceived by someone that persuades you. Okay? Now there's a little bit of a play on words in this verse here, because he says, let no man deceive you, let no man persuade you with their vain words, for because of these things cometh the wrath of God upon the children of disobedience. So the people that go and do these things, that engage in filthiness, foolish talking, jesting, etc., this bad behaviour, those people are going to receive the wrath of God. Why? Because they're children of disobedience. But this word disobedience, you'll see in the margin, they've sort of given you a hint, unbelief, but it's actually the Greek word apatheia. The word apatheia is made up of two words, a, which is the negative in the Greek, and patho, which means to persuade. So these people are not willing to be persuaded to do godly things. So don't you be persuaded by them, because they're not being persuaded by God. So there's play on words that Paul's pulling out of that verse. Don't be deceived. Verse 7, be not therefore partakers with them. Quite clear, isn't it? These disobedient people are unable to be persuaded to live godly. They've passed the point of listening. They're unable to be persuaded. That's what the phrase disobedience means. It's actually the result, isn't it? The word disobedience probably isn't the right word, but that's the result of someone that's unwilling to be persuaded. They just act disobediently. Now, clearly, this has reference to right and wrong behaviour. So it's not doctrines anymore. This idea of deception is not limited to just teachings. It expands to practice. It expands to behaviour. The two go hand in hand. Let's have a look at another one. 1 John chapter 3. The elder writer John here in 1 John 3, he says this. Verse 7. Little children, let no man deceive you. Here it is again. Right? He that doeth righteousness is righteous, even as he, and the word he there is Jesus, isn't it? Even as Jesus is righteous. Okay? He that doeth righteousness is righteous. If you don't do righteousness, you can't be righteous. If your practice is unrighteousness in behaviour, you are unrighteous. Don't be deceived. You can't separate the two. If you maintain a lifestyle with sin, and we can't go into the context, but that's what he's talking about all the way through this section, those who commit sin. It means to be continually doing sin. Keep on sinning. Live a lifestyle of sin. If you maintain a lifestyle with sin, you are not righteous. No matter what anyone tells you, no matter what you tell yourself. If you listen to any other words other than God's, then you will be deceived. So clearly, this section here that John is portraying has to do with behaviour, doesn't it? Right and wrong behaviour. All right, well, that's the warning, okay? And that's fine, go away, and you've got to say, I can't be deceived, I can't be deceived. Well, what do you do to sort of stop yourself being deceived? What's the remedy? Well, come to the reading in Galatians 6 that we had to see what Paul says here about the remedy. And again, without being able to go into the whole chapter, we're just picking up these phrases. You can go home and look at these a bit deeper yourself. This is what Paul says. Verse 7, be not deceived. God is not mocked. You can't sneer at God. That's the idea behind this word. You can't sneer at God. Whatever a man sows, that's what he's going to reap. Verse 8, he that sows to the flesh, he's going to reap things of the flesh. He that sows to the Spirit shall reap of the Spirit. Okay, now maybe some of the younger ones here might be able to join the dots here a little bit if you've done a little bit of work on this in EYG, because I know you're going through some of these things. When it says, he that soweth to his flesh, and he that soweth to the Spirit, where else in this epistle do you need to go to find out what it is that you need to sow? If you're going to sow to the flesh, what sort of things will you reap? If you're going to sow to the Spirit, what sort of things will you reap? What's the cross-reference to write on that verse? Anyone know? Youth group age should know. Some smiles on faces. Anyone older can help them out? Where's?
5, verse 19 to 23.
Galatians 5, verse 19 to 23. Okay? Which talk about the works of the flesh and the fruit of the Spirit. If you sow to the flesh, you will get works of flesh. If you sow to the Spirit, you will get fruit of the Spirit. Okay, it's quite clear. The fact that there's a chapter break distorts it for us. Paul's on the same wavelength all the way through this section. It's only just a little few verses before. Okay? So, the remedy, what's the remedy? If you want to reap the fruit of the Spirit, you've got to put effort in to sow to the seed of the Spirit. You've got to put Spirit seeds in the ground, in your heart. You will not get the fruit of the Spirit if you don't put that work in. That's clearly a remedy. Okay? You will get back what you put in. No amount of saying otherwise will change that fact. Oh, I'll do the readings tomorrow, or I'll start my Bible study tomorrow, or youth group are going through this, so I don't need to do it at home. Or all of those excuses, if you don't put the effort in, you won't get the benefit back. And that's what he's saying. Effort in the right areas will reap produce of the right quality. That's quite simple, isn't it? That's the remedy from here in Galatians 6. But I want to just show you, I said we were going to go back to a word. Can anyone remember what the word was I said we'd go back to? Did I say it so quick? No? Remember the word simple? I said we'll come back to this word simple. I want to just show you a few quotes that go together where the remedy becomes extremely clear. How much effort do you need to put in? That's the question that comes out of Galatians here. How much effort? How much work do you need to put in to sow to the Spirit? Okay? Is it 1 day out of 7? Is it Sundays and maybe Wednesday nights? Is that enough? How much effort? That's the question. Let's see what the answer might be. Okay. You'll probably read ahead there and see things, but let's follow through these 3 quotes just to find out what the remedy is. Proverbs 7. Now, the early chapters of Proverbs sort of talk about this in greater detail, but chapter 7 just zones in on young people who are simple. In other words, they haven't put the work in to find out the facts. If you're a young person and you are just relying on everyone else and you're not putting the work in yourself and diligently trying to find out for yourself the facts, you could end up in this scenario. Okay? Now, we won't go into the details of the story. This is a young man who thought he believed in God, who thought he knew the truth. Okay? But there's this woman. Now, she represents the world. Okay? She represents everything to do with the world and all the flashing lights and all the pleasures that the world offers. Okay? But it's put into a bit of a story that we as young people can understand. So here's the young man. The woman in verse 10 says, and behold, in verse 6, this woman, for at the window of my house I looked through my casement, and I beheld among the simple ones. So he doesn't have much in regards to Bible knowledge in his mind. Oh, he's pretty good at all the expert things about football and about fashion, maybe, but we're talking simple here in regards to the things of God. Okay? I discerned among the youths a young man void of understanding. He hasn't put the work in, you see. Hasn't put the effort in. Okay? He thinks he knows enough. But he watches this young man, and he's walking through the streets, and he passes through the street near to this woman's house. And he went the way to her house. He doesn't know where he's going to end up. In the twilight, in the evening, in the black and dark night. Now, has anyone gone outside and tried to find on a dark pitch night how to get from the back fence to the back door? I don't know how big your property is, okay, but on a dark night, it can be quite tricky, especially if there's a few trees and the clothesline in the way, the dog's barking. You might find you trip over a few times. Well, this young man thinks, I can go down here, I know what I'm doing. Verse 10, and behold, there met him a woman with the attire of a harlot and subtle of heart. She is loud and stubborn. Her feet abide not in a house. Now is she without, now in the streets, and lieth wait at every corner. She caught him, she kissed him, and she said, I have peace offerings. Oh, do you? Oh, that's Bible somewhere in the Bible, peace offerings. She must be religious. She knows a bit about the Bible. I know a bit about the Bible. We've got something in common. Come with me, she says. And she says, come home to my place. And he thinks, well, she's a Bible believer. Nothing can go wrong with this. I can go and join her. I've perfumed my bed, verse 17, with myrrh, aloes, and cinnamon. Come down to verse 21. With her much fair speech, she caused him to yield. She deceived him. With the flattering of her lips, she forced him. He goeth after her straightway, as an ox goeth to the slaughter, or as a fool to the correction of the stocks, till a dart strikes through his heart, through his liver, as a bird hasteth to the snare. He doesn't know he's heading to death. It sounded good, just like Eve listening to the serpent. It sounded good, sort of had a bit of truth in it, peace offerings. God's involved in this scenario, and he falls headlong into this scenario that ends up in his death because he didn't have enough knowledge that she's false. She doesn't have the truth, and she doesn't stand up for truth. He didn't know that. Okay, so young ones, you can't stay simple. Listen as much as you can from talks like tonight, from mum and dad, from doing the readings, from Sunday school. Just try and absorb as much of the truth of God as you can. Let's take that idea forward. Maybe we can just go to Matthew 16 on our way through. Matthew 10, verse 16 on our way through. Okay? Because Jesus says something here that's the remedy to this problem. Because he says, behold, I send you forth as sheep in the midst of wolves. But these wolves will be masquerading as sheep, so you won't necessarily know that they're a wolf. What's the remedy to not being deceived by a wolf in sheep's clothing? Well, the remedy is to be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. Now, you'll notice in the margin that the word harmless is actually the word simple. So there are times to be simple, and there are times to be wise. Okay. Wise about what? Simple about what? Well, Romans chapter 16 unlocks the key before we head to 1 Corinthians 14 and Hebrews 5. Because Paul, I don't know if he heard these words of Jesus, but he almost quotes them verbatim. Because he says this: Jesus used the metaphor of doves and snakes. What's a dove like? Anyone know what brain capacity a dove has? Bird-brained, heard that expression? Not much upstairs, is there? Thick as two bricks. But doves are quite basic, simple birds. They flap around, they hop around, they're on the perch, then they're on the ground. If they're sort of come into the garden, they might be on the fence, then they're on the grass. And all the while, the cat or the dog's looking at them, and they've got no idea that they're sitting prey. All right, thick as two bricks, okay? Bird-brained. Snakes, what are they like? How many snakes do you see? You don't tend to see many snakes. They know exactly where you are. They've actually got what's called inner ears that hear the vibrations on the ground, and they know where you are before you know where they are. Very, very smart animals. Okay? So here's a dumb bird and a smart snake. There are times when you are to be a dumb bird, and there are times when you are to be a smart snake. Well, come to Romans 16, verse 19, because Paul takes the metaphors out and tells us exactly what it is to be wise about and exactly what it is to be simple about. Verse 19, for your obedience has come abroad unto all men. I am glad, therefore, on your behalf, but yet I would have you to be wise unto that which is good. So wise as serpents, but now he tells you what it is to be wise about. Wise unto that which is good, and simple concerning evil. Now the word good there, agathos, it means to be good. You know, it means to be things that are worthwhile and good. And the word evil, which is the word kakos, means to be things that are worthless, not good. Don't waste your time on them, okay? So there are things that you have to be wise about that are beneficial and good, and there are things that you are to be dumb about, simple about, things that are worthless, trash, and rubbish, okay? Now come to 1 Corinthians 14, because here the apostle picks up this idea again, and instead of using animals, snakes and doves, he uses adults and children. Adults, you know, are supposed to be quite smart, and the children are innocent and young and quite simple. And this is what he says in verse 20. He says, brethren, don't be children in understanding. Things that are important, things that are worthwhile, things that are godly. Don't be children in those things. You need to be children when it comes to malice. That word malice is our word kakos, the word evil. It means things that are worthless, things that are useless, things that won't help you get to the kingdom. You need to be children when it comes to those things that friends at university or in the workplace sort of throw around, the banter and all the crude jokes and stuff. You don't get into it. Be dumb as when they speak about those things. But when they want to speak to you about the Bible, you need to be an expert. You need to be knowing your stuff. So in understanding, be men. And the word men there means to be mature, to be grown up. You can all understand that. So adults and children. There are times to act like a simple, innocent child when you go out there in the world, and there are times when you are to act like a grown-up. This is to do with things of God. This is to do with things of the world. So that's the remedy. It's quite simple. What do you put your effort into? What you sow is what you reap. If you're into all of those worldly things, like the grand final on the footy and all of that, okay, you'll be an expert in those things, giving you no time to be an expert in the things that matter. Paul says, don't waste your time. Now, he really hammers it home in Ephesians 5. He keeps the metaphor of adults and children, okay? Adults and children, so we'll finish here in Hebrews 5. And it's quite a heavy book, isn't it, Hebrews, okay? You don't sort of choose this for your first study, all right? I'd be doing Haggai or something like that, or Ruth, something smaller and simpler, but Hebrews. But when Paul wrote Hebrews, he was writing to people that should have known better. But he has to stop halfway through chapter 5 and he says, look, this is too hard for you because you're acting like children when you should be grown-ups. In fact, it's actually teachers and students is the metaphor that he uses in verse 11 to verse 14. So in verse 10 he says, called of God and high priest after the order of Melchizedek, of whom I want to tell you a bit more about, but I can't because you're dull of hearing. For when for the time you ought to be teachers, you've been in the truth a long time now, you Jerusalem ecclesia, you're the oldest ecclesia around, you should know better, you should be the teachers. You should be the teachers, but you need one to teach you again the first principles of the oracles of God, the baby stuff of the truth, and have become as such as have need of milk and not strong meat. Now, it's talking about babies who need milk, and you can't give a newborn baby solids until they're grown up a little bit, can you? You can't give them, a nice chunky steak at the age of 6 months or 1 year. You've got to give them milk for a while. Well, that's what you are like, he says. For everyone that useth milk is unskillful in the word of righteousness because he's still a baby. But strong meat, the deep things of the Bible, belong to them that are of full age, which is the same as the word men back in 1 Corinthians 14 verse 20. Okay, it means to be mature, to be grown up. Now here it is. This is the bit that really, how much work do you have to put in? Well, have a look what Paul says. Even those who by reason of use, okay, you'll see in the margin, that word means to be habitual. You do it all the time. You never stop. It's by reason of use. It's become a habit. You do this every single day. What? What are you doing? You're having your senses exercised to discern both good and evil. Now, the word evil here is the same word kakos that we've already seen. Okay, it means worthless. How do you know something's worthless? How do you know? Well, you've got to study, you've got to find out. But what if something looks really like something truthful? How do you know where the difference lies? Do you know, the Apostle Paul uses a different word, good, that he's used anywhere else in his letters. He uses an unusual word. It's not used anywhere else. Okay, it's the Greek word kalos. Now, these people, by reason of use, by exercising this day in, day out, are able to tell even the smallest differences that exist between things that are worthwhile and things that are useless, between the kalos and the kakos. Now, if you get a young primary school student or a baby to look at the differences between those two words, you would barely notice it. You need to know spelling. You need to know language. You need to have done some work because they look very similar. And a quick glance at those, you would say, oh, that's the same word. All that differs is that there's a kicking K on the L, isn't there? That's the only difference. Everything else is the same. So Paul's deliberately used two Greek words that look the same. But the only people that can tell the difference are the experts. That's what he's saying about living your life in the truth. Become an expert so much that you'll be able to tell the differences between even the smallest things that are right or wrong, which children can't do. So as parents, as teachers, as speakers, as Sunday school teachers, we want to teach our children these skills. And you young people are one day going to grow up and stop drinking milk and start eating strong meat. You'll only do that if you put this effort in. So there we are. Quite a subject, isn't it? Be not deceived. It's happening all the time in the world. Let's hope, let's pray, let's work hard that it never happens to us. So that when Jesus returns, he will see that what we sowed is what we reap. The fruit of the spirits, which is everlasting life.